Right now, across thousands of miles of countryside, China is running power lines at voltages so high that Western electrical engineers once declared them physically impossible to insulate. While the American power grid loses billions of dollars in wasted electricity every single year just pushing energy across state lines, this Chinese supergrid moves massive amounts of power clear across an entire continent with practically zero energy loss. But here is the wild part. They are not just powering local cities, they are running 1.1 million volt superhighways that pump clean electricity from desert solar farms, thousands of miles away, directly into coastal metropolises in milliseconds. Western power grids were built for the 20th century, and rebuilding them would take trillions of dollars and decades of political gridlock. Meanwhile, this mega grid is already fully operational, and it is quietly giving Chinese factories the cheapest, most uninterrupted manufacturing power on Earth. The electrical decay trapping the West is currently destroying American manufacturing independence. Look directly at the massive Texas power grid right now. Legacy utility operators completely fail to keep the lights on during extreme weather. Industry watchdogs point out severe structural rot inside these regional monopolies. Energy market critics allege these massive corporations actively refuse to upgrade aging copper lines, prioritizing short-term executive stock bonuses over critical infrastructure investments. This arrogant complacency creates a catastrophic national vulnerability that leaves entire states at the absolute mercy of the weather. Financial reports describe rolling blackouts causing massive economic devastation across the American South and Midwest, where a single winter storm instantly paralyzes millions of terrified citizens who are left to freeze in the dark. The American electrical grid bleeds staggering amounts of raw energy constantly. Pushing standard low-voltage electricity across a massive continent creates intense physical resistance inside the wire, causing aging copper lines to literally heat up and burn away valuable power before it ever reaches a residential home or a commercial factory. Western consumers are forced to pay for this massive, invisible energy waste on every single monthly bill. Utility monopolies simply pass these catastrophic financial losses directly to ordinary families, while Western executives sit in air-conditioned boardrooms blaming extreme weather for their own massive infrastructure failures. China completely rejected this fragile, localized energy trap. Chinese engineers looked at the crumbling Western grid and engineered a brutal, mathematically perfect solution, stepping in as the undisputed architects of continental power delivery. China built a sprawling electrical nervous system designed for the absolute limits of physics, aggressively connecting distant renewable energy hubs directly to massive industrial centers on the coast. This decisive action completely insulated Chinese manufacturing from devastating regional blackouts, ensuring that their massive automotive and technology factories never experience a single drop in voltage. The legacy Western grid remains a fragmented, highly vulnerable mess that is actively choking domestic industrial growth. Chinese energy infrastructure is actively seizing absolute control of global industrial dominance by simply providing a superior, unbreakable electrical product. Before we look at the impossible physics powering this massive supergrid, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel right now. You will never miss the engineering deep dives quietly reshaping our world. You cannot secure the future of global manufacturing with rotting copper wires. You have to completely rewrite the physical laws of energy transmission. But how exactly do you move over 1 million volts across a continent without melting the entire system? The grid that defied the laws of physics completely revolutionized global energy distribution forever. Liu Jianye served as the visionary chairman of the State Grid Corporation of China, and he watched Western nations struggle for decades with massive, leaky electrical networks. He realized a brutal physical truth about energy transmission that Western executives completely ignored. You physically cannot power a massive, rapidly expanding modern continent using outdated, low-voltage copper lines. To achieve absolute industrial dominance, Liu Jianye made a radically aggressive engineering decision by ordering the construction of a staggering 1.1 million volt ultra-high voltage supergrid. Western electrical engineers laughed at this extreme, unprecedented vision, publicly claiming that atmospheric ionization made this massive voltage physically impossible to insulate outside of a laboratory environment. They predicted catastrophic arc flashes, explosive infrastructure failures, and a massive waste of national capital. Chinese engineers completely ignored this arrogant Western skepticism. Liu Zhenya assembled a massive national engineering task force to conquer atmospheric physics, taking the ultimate energy gamble by dedicating billions of dollars to build an entirely new species of power grid from the ground up. Chinese researchers constructed custom state-of-the-art laboratories equipped with massive testing chambers, deliberately pushing electrical currents past 1 million volts to observe exactly how the electricity behaved under extreme stress. This relentless testing schedule cracked the absolute code of extreme energy transmission, allowing China to engineer bespoke titanium hardware capable of caging the most violent electrical currents on Earth. Look at the sheer financial violence of the traditional Western utility model. The legacy American grid wastes roughly $50 billion in transmission heat loss annually, a staggering monetary leak large enough to fund 10 modern nuclear aircraft carriers in pure cash. While Western utility monopolies violently force ordinary consumers and local factories to absorb this catastrophic financial loss, the Chinese ultra-high voltage network slashes long-distance transmission loss completely in half. China designed an energy system that actively accelerates industrial manufacturing, intentionally building a commercial and geopolitical weapon that Western monopolies physically cannot match without spending trillions of dollars. The Chinese system uses brilliant hardware innovations to seamlessly suppress explosive electrical arcing in the open air. I want you to hold on to this specific mechanical detail for later. Chinese engineers perfected multi-bundled conductor spacing and synthetic resin composite insulators, treating the incredibly dangerous movement of 1 million volts like a perfect, sterile mathematical equation. By precisely calculating the exact distance required between massive electrical cables, they completely eliminated the risk of the current violently jumping into the surrounding steel towers. Remember this multi-bundled conductor spacing when we discuss geopolitical leverage and the absolute failure of Western grid infrastructure later in the video. China proved that the ultimate future of industrial power relies entirely on mastering extreme voltage. But how does this extreme supergrid actually move massive energy across unforgiving environments without melting the wire? The architecture of the Lightning Highway relies on absolute mathematical precision and flawless material science. Walk out into the brutal, scorching heat of the massive Gobi Desert, and you will immediately notice towering titanium alloy structures piercing the sky across the barren landscape. These massive pylons carry a crushing electrical current capable of instantly vaporizing an entire city block, yet they operate in complete, eerie silence. The central physics of power transmission are actually brutally simple to understand. Standard legacy, Western transmission lines rely on low voltage and high current, which creates intense atomic friction as millions of electrons violently smash into the copper wire, resulting in massive heat loss over long distances. China completely rejected this dangerous primitive method of energy delivery by cranking the pressure to an unbelievable 1.1 million volts instead, prioritizing extreme electrical pressure over raw current. This extreme pressure drops the physical current and completely eliminates physical heat friction, but it creates an entirely new mechanical nightmare for civil engineers. At 1.1 million volts, the rogue electricity violently tries to escape the metal wire, attempting to rip electrons directly from the surrounding air to create a dangerous, glowing halo known as corona discharge. Chinese engineers designed a flawless mechanical ballet to trap this rogue electrical force by splitting a single massive phase into 8 separate bundled subconductors, utilizing incredibly precise geometric shapes to completely suppress the explosive atmospheric ionization. Contrast this flawless automated operation with a painful legacy Western grid failure happening right now. A frantic American repair crew bakes in a deadly Texas heat wave, utilizing dangerous bucket trucks to manually splice sagging, overloaded copper lines dangling from highly flammable wooden poles. This constant infrastructure decay paralyzes regional manufacturing constantly, forcing factories to shut down just to prevent the aging grid from entirely catching fire. Now look back at the silent Chinese titanium alloy towers operating flawlessly across massive, uninhabitable desert landscapes, towering over extreme mountain ranges and deep river valleys in a relentless straight line stretching farther than driving from New York City straight across to Dallas. To maintain this flawless system without human intervention, automated drones continuously monitor the massive cables using advanced thermal imaging cameras, instantly detecting microscopic stress points and temperature variations before they can ever trigger a mechanical failure. The Chinese supergrid navigates this extreme weather and brutal geography using a brilliant hidden technology. I need you to remember this specific digital detail. The massive grid utilizes highly advanced adaptive reactive power compensation stations. These massive digital outposts sit quietly in isolated mountain passes without any human intervention, instantly injecting stabilizing power into the line to automatically correct massive voltage swings. Keep these adaptive compensation stations in mind when we discuss complete blackout immunity during severe superstorms later in the video. China engineered an unbreakable mechanical spine for their massive nation, taking the most dangerous, unpredictable job in electrical engineering and completely sterilizing it. This continental lightning highway operates 24 hours a day without fail, completely rewriting the physical limits of global energy delivery. This isolated mechanical perfection is currently expanding at a staggering, terrifying rate. The continental scale of the power shift is currently transforming the baseline reality of global manufacturing. Walk out into the scorching center of the massive Xinjiang region, where an absolute ocean of shimmering solar panels stretches all the way to the physical horizon to feed a towering converter station humming with incredible raw power. This massive facility is the starting point of the Changji-Guquan Lightning Highway, the most advanced high-capacity electrical artery ever constructed on the entire planet. Carrying a staggering 12 gigawatts of raw energy, this single massive transmission line moves enough clean power to instantly supply a population larger than the entire country of Spain. China moves this massive electrical payload across an unbelievable 3,200 kilometers, crossing towering mountain ranges and brutally deep river valleys to funnel clean electricity from remote desert energy hubs directly into dense coastal metropolises. But capturing massive amounts of desert sunlight is only half the battle, because pushing that raw voltage into the industrial east requires completely bypassing the catastrophic physical limitations of alternating current. While legacy Western grids stubbornly rely on alternating current that violently oscillates back and forth, bleeding massive amounts of kinetic heat over long distances, Chinese engineers utilized highly advanced ultra-high voltage direct current to push the power in one massive uninterrupted straight line. This brilliant engineering choice completely eliminates the catastrophic heat friction that plagues Western infrastructure, allowing the raw power to arrive at the coastal factories completely intact. China did not just build a single novelty project to show off at a tech expo. The Changji-Guquan link is merely the crown jewel of a sprawling continental web. China currently operates 45 separate ultra-high voltage lines spanning over 40,000 kilometers, a massive web of highly specialized steel and wire long enough to completely wrap around the Earth. While Western nations agonizingly struggle through decades of environmental lawsuits just to build a single regional transmission tower, China is moving absolute mountains. They are currently planning 15 brand new ultra-high voltage transmission lines to be completed by 2030, with the state grid recently investing over $43 billion into expanding this infrastructure. That is a staggering capital injection large enough to buy a major American television network in pure cash, proving that this continental scale completely dwarfs any legacy Western capability. Legacy grids in the West actively reject clean energy generation daily because their rotting infrastructure physically cannot handle the supply. Look at a massive solar farm baking in the California sun. When the massive panels generate peak power at noon, the aging local grid cannot handle the massive voltage surge, forcing the facility to intentionally shut down and throw pure clean electricity away just to prevent a catastrophic grid explosion. China completely solved this physical bottleneck by using the ultra-high voltage network as a massive high-capacity bridge, moving staggering volumes of renewable energy from remote regions directly into robust economic centers, so Chinese factories never experience a single brownout. Massive, heavily fortified converter stations sit on the edge of eastern mega-cities, utilizing solid-state silicon and incredibly complex thyristor valves to smoothly step down the violent voltage. These tiny computer microprocessors manage the most violent electrical currents on Earth, safely distributing the power into the local city grid without frying the regional system or relying on the massive, clunky mechanical switches that frequently break in Western substations. This entire Changji-Guquan megaproject was constructed in just 3 years, whereas a similar infrastructure project in the United States would take 2 decades of political gridlock to even break ground. When a Western grid manager watches nervously as summer air conditioning demand spikes, they desperately ask heavy industries to shut down operations to save the grid, deliberately initiating an economic sabotage that bleeds millions of dollars from the local economy daily. The Chinese grid operator simply taps a digital screen to pull an extra gigawatt of solar power from a desert 3 time zones away, ensuring the massive automotive plant keeps running at absolute maximum capacity. The factory that moves the world is currently plugged directly into the Chinese desert, offering global manufacturers a sterile, hyper-efficient electrical ecosystem that completely eliminates the catastrophic financial risks associated with Western grid failures. The geopolitical energy killshot is rapidly closing around the West. Legacy, Western power grids built their massive financial empires on a fatal structural flaw by dividing massive, interconnected nations into tiny fragmented regional fiefdoms where local utility monopolies actively refuse to share power across state lines. Look directly at the violently isolated energy grid operating inside the state of Texas, which physically cannot borrow wind power from a neighboring state during a catastrophic winter crisis because it refuses to connect to the national grid. This arrogant fragmentation creates a massive logistical nightmare during extreme weather events, trapping Western executives in a stubborn political gridlock where they simply patch together aging copper lines and pray the fragile system holds through the winter. When a brutal cold snap inevitably hits, the regional grid collapses entirely, leaving desperate families to freeze in the dark while neighboring states literally have excess power to spare, but no physical transmission lines to send it. China skipped this chaotic, hyper-localized bureaucracy entirely to seize global energy logistics, building a unified national supergrid from the ground up to weaponize extreme energy efficiency and supercharge their entire manufacturing base. By seamlessly connecting their resource-rich western provinces to their manufacturing-heavy eastern coast, China successfully turned geographical distance into a total non-issue. Remember that multi-bundled conductor spacing I told you to hold on to earlier? This is exactly where that brilliant mechanical geometry becomes a lethal geopolitical weapon that completely traps Western infrastructure. When you attempt to push 1.1 million volts across a massive continent, physical atmospheric resistance is your absolute worst enemy. A standard legacy wire would instantly melt into a puddle of molten slag, and the explosive corona discharge would literally set the surrounding dry mountain ranges on fire. The massive electrical pressure desperately wants to arc into the grounded steel towers, but the Chinese geometric bundling completely neutralizes this catastrophic atmospheric threat. By splitting the massive electrical current across 8 separate wires positioned in a perfect ring, Chinese engineers expanded the electrical surface area, drastically reducing the severe electrical stress on the surrounding air to safely contain the massive voltage while pushing it across unforgiving terrain. This flawless mechanical spacing allows China to securely lock down its industrial dominance because Western engineers completely failed to master this specific atmospheric physics, leaving them stuck building thousands of smaller, highly inefficient towers that clutter the landscape. China simply builds one massive ultra-high voltage line that effortlessly does the work of 10 standard localized grids. Picture a massive, highly advanced semiconductor factory operating on the Chinese coast that requires absolutely flawless, uninterrupted power to bake delicate silicon wafers. A microsecond drop in voltage destroys millions of dollars in highly sensitive electronics instantly. And because the Western power grid frequently suffers from these microscopic voltage dips, American factories bleed massive amounts of capital, throwing away ruined digital components. The Chinese supergrid delivers an impossibly smooth, perfectly flat line of pure power, utilizing those multi-bundled lines to guarantee maximum efficiency and absolute manufacturing safety. China aggressively leverages this hyper-efficiency to dominate international supply chains effortlessly, making Western nations completely dependent on this Chinese industrial powerhouse just to maintain baseline production. If a Western factory suffers a regional blackout, production completely stops for days while the utility company scrambles to find the broken wire. The Chinese automated factory simply downloads massive amounts of clean desert power and keeps working, providing a sterile, robotic manufacturing environment that is completely immune to regional energy shortages. This absolute reliability guarantees a steady flow of essential goods when the rest of the world stops, making China the most powerful economic partner on Earth. Developing nations eagerly sign massive, multi-billion-dollar contracts to copy the Chinese electrical web, completely rejecting the devastating failures of the American grid in favor of flawless Chinese automation. China is no longer just moving cheap consumer electronics and plastic toys. They are manufacturing the massive industrial components that build entire nations, successfully changing the entire baseline cost structure of international manufacturing. The West is desperately trying to catch up to a future China already built, trapping legacy Western grids in a brutal energy war they have entirely lost. The electrified future waiting in the dark is accelerating at an impossible pace. Every single day, the Chinese supergrid gets significantly smarter because the massive artificial intelligence brain running the network constantly learns from millions of remote electrical data points. This incredible digital network autonomously predicts power demand spikes hours before they actually happen, routing clean desert power to coastal factories entirely without human intervention. While Western utility operators still desperately rely on manual phone calls to beg industrial clients to shut down during grid emergencies, the Chinese software flywheel creates a massive compounding technological advantage. The legacy American grid only decays and rusts over time as extreme weather batters the aging copper lines. But the Chinese digital ecosystem actually improves its own physical efficiency overnight by optimizing the flow of electrons through deep machine learning. But the real future goes far beyond national borders, as China is actively building a globally interconnected energy web to dominate international power markets. Visionary engineer Liu Zhenya currently leads the Global Energy Interconnection Organization, which is actively designing a massive, low-loss, ultra-high voltage transmission network to connect entire continents together. China plans to build 15 brand new ultra-high voltage lines by 2030, with the state grid officially investing over $580 billion into this massive expansion. This is a staggering capital injection large enough to buy out several major Western automakers entirely in cash, physically forging the massive titanium towers and synthetic composite insulators required for absolute global energy dominance. Look at the sheer scale of this upcoming global energy shift, where a massive solar farm in North Africa could theoretically power industrial automotive factories in Northern Europe. Or a sprawling wind farm in Siberia could directly supply clean electricity to Beijing. Imagine a massive, highly advanced data center running critical global artificial intelligence servers that require massive, entirely uninterrupted electrical currents to function properly without crashing. A legacy Western data center is forced to rely on highly expensive, dirty diesel backup generators that frequently fail during severe regional power drops, costing tech companies millions in lost uptime. A Chinese AI data center draws pure stable power directly from the supergrid, completely eliminating the massive financial overhead of maintaining physical backup generators and giving Chinese tech companies a massive, unfair competitive advantage globally. Now, Remember those adaptive reactive power compensation stations I told you to hold on to from earlier in the video? This is exactly where the Chinese electrical nervous system completely defeats unpredictable nature and permanently outclasses Western infrastructure. Industry watchdogs describe legacy Western grids collapsing instantly when severe weather strikes, whether a heavy winter freeze shuts down vulnerable natural gas plants or a violent summer heat wave overloads aging copper lines and melts critical transformers. The legacy Western grid simply trips offline to prevent a catastrophic explosion, forcing desperate operators to initiate rolling blackouts that plunge entire cities into total darkness. The Chinese ultra-high voltage grid completely ignores these violent weather events because those isolated adaptive compensation stations instantly detect microscopic voltage drops across the massive continent. They instantly inject precise amounts of reactive power directly into the struggling transmission line, perfectly stabilizing the massive electrical current in mere milliseconds, so the superhighway remains completely balanced despite the violent atmospheric pressure. If a massive rogue storm damages a desert solar array, the artificial intelligence seamlessly pulls excess wind power from a mountain range 2,000 miles away. The coastal factory never experiences a single microsecond of power loss, proving that Western monopolies simply cannot fight a digital machine that balances an entire continent instantly. The final energy revolution is already here. The era of localized, fragmented energy grids is completely dead. We used to believe pushing massive electricity across continents was physically impossible. China shattered that assumption and built an invincible continental power superhighway. The legacy Western utility monopolies still trying to patch rotting copper wires have already lost. The future of global manufacturing will be decided by whoever controls the most reliable grid. If a supergrid can deliver endless clean energy without a single blackout, can Western manufacturing survive the disadvantage? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below.